Most Soulsborne games have references to the manga called Berserk, but probably no other game has as many references to Berserk like Elden Ring has. As such, I'm going over every single reference I could find, ranging from that obvious to a tad of a far stretch. So, let's begin with the very first reference we can see within 2 minutes of starting the game, the Earth Tree. The tree is inspired by the world spiral tree from Berserk's Fantasia arc. It is an enormous tree with branches spanning all across the world and allowing certain groups to fast travel throughout the world of Berserk. In a similar fashion as to how the city of Falconia is situated at the base of the world spiral tree, so too is Leyndell built at the basis of the Earth Tree. Another reference to Berserk's giant tree is also the Halig tree with Alphael at its basis, which is coming with another inspiration from Berserk's architecture. The building's architecture of the Halig tree's town, situated in the tree's branches, is very inspired by Flora's house and the mage's houses on the island of Skellig. However, those aren't the only Berserk references we can find at the Halig tree. Its creator Miquella was heavily inspired by Griffith's character, which resulted in an almost identical copy of Griffith. There are a total of 9 major similarities I found between these two characters, like the androgynous design, their metamorphosis, wishing for an eclipse, ties to the astral plane, and others, which I'm covering in detail in a dedicated video you should check out for this particular topic. To explain one other similarity briefly, both Miquella and Griffith created a giant tree in both stories respectively and have their own kingdom's capital city at the foot of their creation. But next to this major reference, Griffith also inspired a couple of other Easter eggs in Elden Ring. Specifically, 4 references linked to arguably the most pivotal arc in Berserk, the Eclipse. The Prisoner Iron Mask description has the following line of lore: a foul creation designed to torment the wearer, either slowly fermenting hatred within their heart, or a spiritual fervor that is near indistinguishable from it. The sentence and mask are certainly inspired by Griffith being a prisoner and tortured for 2 years straight by the Midland Kingdom. The mask's description alludes to how Griffith grew to hate Guts for leaving him and blaming his downfall on Guts' departure, as well as the vision Griffith had about the God Hand in his cell right before Guts and the others rescued him. Leading up to the eclipse, where in another vision fabricated by the God Hand, Griffith encounters an old woman whose clothes and role strike an interesting similarity to Enya in Round Table Hold. Next to their similar attire, both women guide Griffith or us towards a certain goal, which we can only reach by making a sacrifice. In Griffith's case, he had to sacrifice his soldiers to become the God King Femto, while the Tarnished had to sacrifice Melina in order to become Elden Lord. But next to this, a little scribble in the manga shaped the design for an integral gameplay mechanic. I'm talking about the design of the last tear Griffith shed before becoming Femto. This tear's pattern inspired the crystal teardrops in the design, which are used in the wondrous physics flask. But probably the biggest design influence Griffith had on Elden Ring, excluding Miquella, are the Fallen Hawk enemies. Their small, frail, and tortured-looking bodies were heavily inspired by Griffith's tortured body. Looking at both bodies, you will instantly notice that those are eerily identical. However, what seals the fact that this enemy is Griffith-inspired is the name of Fallen Hawk Company. At the beginning of Griffith's torture, where the King of Midland visits him, the chapter's name is the Fallen Hawk. And those aren't the only instances where Elden Ring's character designs were inspired by Berserk. After all, the designs for Elden Ring's characters borrowed inspiration from many characters in Berserk as well. While we already covered one Round Table Hold character, let's go over the rest of them. With the next reference being Ensha, whose wall remains armor draws heavy inspiration from Skull Knight. This becomes even more apparent when reading the armor's lore, stating that Ensha was once a lord. As such, King Gaisric's transformation into Skull Knight that came with the loss of his kingdom was most likely used to shape Ensha's character. Though Gaisric wasn't only used as inspiration for Ensha, but also for one of Elden Ring's best bosses next to other characters from Berserk. Radahn's design was heavily influenced by 3 Berserk characters, which resulted in an amalgamation of multiple character designs. The most striking resemblance comes from the armor Gaisric wears in this panel. Where Radahn's armor design significantly differs, however, comes in form of his helmet. His helmet's design is, instead of a skull, inspired by the helmet the Apostle Grunbelt wears in his human form. Its similarity can be seen through the horns both helmets are adorned with, as well as in how both helmets allow a clear view at the face of its wearer. And yet, Radahn doesn't wield a rapier or a great warhammer like Gaiswick or Grunbelt. Instead, he prefers to wield two curved greatswords which were derived from the sword Zod is wielding in his human form. By drawing inspiration from these three characters, I'm inclined to believe that the goal for the creation of Radahn was to show the embodiment of a great warrior champion and leader, a goal From Software definitely succeeded in. So thanks for creating a Giga-Chan. Also a reference the studio nails in every medieval game setting is to include a blacksmith similar to Godo. While this time using a demi-human instead of a human model, Hugh bears a good amount of similar characteristics like Godo. Next to his beard being the only visual similarity, he also is an excellent blacksmith who is also responsible for creating the ultimate weapon. Instead of creating a giant sword that could kill a dragon in one strike though, he is tasked with the creation of an ultimate weapon capable of killing a god. And his Soulspawn-wide unique similarity to Godo is that Hugh, in a very similar fashion as his inspiration, takes in an abandoned girl and mentors her, making the relationship between Hugh and Roderica similar to that of Godo and Erica. And while we're talking about Roderica, it might surprise you to learn that she's identical to Farnese. So much so that you could swap both characters between Berserk and Elden Ring without suffering from any major changes. When looking at Roderica, we can see a woman of noble upbringing who became crestfallen and lost her faith. She doesn't know what she should do with her life or what her purpose might be. That is until Roderica encounters a mentor in Hugh who pointed out the gift for spirit tuning she possesses. Her mentor taught Roderica the basics, and soon she became a spirit tuner capable of helping us on our journey. And the similarity towards Farnese doesn't end yet, for Farnese's to-be husband is named Roderick. And with Roderica having the female equivalent of this name, it is yet another on-the-nose detail that Farnese served as a template for Roderica, though not when it comes to Roderica's design. Instead, Farnese's armor design was used for a boss I'm sure you have heard of, regardless of having played Elden Ring or not. While Malenia doesn't wear a complete suit of armor, her helmet's design was definitely referenced by the helmet Farnese is wearing during her time as the commander for the Holy Iron Chain Knights, which is also the only reference Malenia has to Berserk. With two Empyreans covered, let's also look at Varni for a moment, which I'm sure you have already figured out by now by whom she was inspired. Her witch attire is inspired by Shirke, but what is more interesting is the deeper similarity both characters have in common, that being responsible for keeping a wild beast under control and keeping it rational. In Berserk, Shirke can manifest her mind as an astral spirit clinging to Guts' berserker armor, which allows Guts to remain his rational self instead of being devoured by the armor's influence. While not being physically attached to someone else, Varni is also responsible for whether her half-brother Blythe stays his usual self or turns into a ferocious berserker, resulting in a connection that is similar to Guts and Shirke. Bringing us to the last similar character design I could find. Blythe is the rational form of Guts in his full berserker armor mode, with Blythe's pose atop the ruins in Mistwood Forest in Limgrave being a replicant of Guts' iconic berserker armor pose, which Artorias on the cover for DS1 DLC embodied more faithful than Blythe. And as already mentioned when looking at Varni, with Blythe losing control over himself as soon as Varni left him and attacking friends and foes alike, it is identical to Guts being consumed by the berserker armor if Shirke doesn't help him to stay in control over it. However, succumbing to a ferocious bestial nature isn't unique just to Blythe in Elden Ring. Godfrey, or White Horror Lu, also possesses this concept of suppressing his true nature, with Sarash being responsible herefore instead of a witch. And this relationship actually replicates this reference to Guts and Shirke more faithfully from a visual standpoint. with Sarosh in an astral form sinking his claws and teeth into Godfrey to not let him go berserk, akin to how Shirke projects her astral copy onto Guts' back to remain in control. To not digress more from Guts, let's finish up his references in Elden Ring along with one other important character from Berserk. Next to Blythe, there are a total of 4 other Guts references present. The most obvious, and a tradition almost as old as including the Moonlight Greatsword in each FromSoft game, is to include a colossal greatsword similar to the Dragon Slayer. Combined with the Ash of War, Lion's Claw, you can roleplay as Guts by unleashing a devastating attack, similar to the one Guts used in his fight against Grunbeld when he donned the Berserker armor for the first time. Though without an armor mod, this roleplay experience will be incomplete due to a lack of a faithfully inspired vanilla Berserker armor set for our character. However, there actually kinda is an armor that draws some inspiration from it, as well as its fighting style that one particular boss embodies. Malekith's armor design's sole visual inspiration from the Berserker armor comes by its layered plating. The other area where the Berserker armor's inspiration was used for Malekith lies within his fighting style in his second boss phase. He jumps, spins, and attacks with a ferocious bestial nature similar to Guts' Berserker mode. Best amplified by looking at the fight between Guts and Grunbeld, where we can see Guts using a similar fighting style. Lastly, the Arsenal Charm is the last concrete enough reference I could find towards Guts in Elden Ring, indicated by the giant sword adorning the center of this talisman. Plus, its description points towards Guts during the Black Swordsman arc with its line about a mass of weaponry carried by a hero full of vengeance. After all, only when Guts began to hunt down apostles did he carry with him a large arsenal of different weapons. And the same way, the talisman actually allows us to equip more weapons without suffering a fat roll penalty. Unless you don't overdo it. However, it is important to note that the Arsenal Charm serves as a double reference to Berserk, since the character giving us this talisman was inspired by Casca, whom is an important person to Guts. With Guts and Griffith having inspired 2 characters in Elden Ring, it was obvious to me that one other character must have been influenced by Casca, who's the last character to form the triage of Berserk's most important characters. And coincidentally with Neferelu giving us the Arsenal Charm, referencing Guts, she must have been inspired by Casca. After all, both Casca and Neferelu grew up among an army led by a leader with great ambitions, who taught each woman respectively many lessons and assumed some form of mentor role. For Casca, this was Griffith, and in Neferelu's case, it is her adoptive father, Gideon. And apart from having a similar skin tone to Casca, Neferelu is also an exceptional warrior serving someone who will inevitably betray her trust and cast her aside. Which happened when Gideon had no use for her anymore, and also aligns with Casca getting betrayed by Griffith during the eclipse. Especially this theme about betrayal of a trusted loved one, combined with the reference to Guts, solidifies in my eyes the inspiration drawn from Casca for Neferelu's character. Moving on, let's take a moment to look at the remaining references to Berserk's apostles. Wildcard's Great Serpentine form is a recurring reference in the Soulsborne franchise towards the snake apostle Guts kills at the beginning of the Black Swordsman arc, which neither Wildcard nor the man-serpents of the Volcano Manor visually resembling him as good as the snakes in Sen's Fortress back in Dark Souls 1. Despite that though, Wildcard possesses a visual similarity to another apostle in Berserk in form of the humanoid face protruding out of his snake body. A design reminiscent of Grunbeld's apostle design with an identical instance of a humanoid face sticking out from his crystal dragon body. And next to Wildcard, Grunbeld most likely also inspired one lore entry for the Ancient Dragons. As we learn through Lancesac's glaive, the Ancient Dragons possess the ability to transform into a human appearance. How this looks and works is unknown to us. But since Grunbeld can switch between his dragon and human form with ease, I speculate that his employed method might be the same for Lancesax and the other Ancient Dragons. The last apostle reference I could find in the game is the design of Wylard's apostle form. His apostle body bears a giant face covering a third of his torso. By amplifying its size to cover its entire torso and adding a nose to the face, we get the design that is found on the fire giant's body during the second boss phase, which I personally find to be a better design than Waylad's. So props to FromSoft's designers to outdo the original source. The last weapon reference I could find is the design of Wildcard's blasphemous blade, bearing some resemblance to Skull Knight's Sword of Beheritz. As for the last piece of armor, having some form of connection to Berserk, is a Bloodhound Knight set. Specifically, its helmet is similar to that of a random soldier seen during the Golden Age arc. As for the last location references, God's birthplace, the tree with corpses hanging from its branches, was perfectly replicated in the Albinoic village. Right across the wooden bridge, we can find a tree covered with hanged Albinoics, striking the same design and mood as this panel from Berserk's manga. Another reference is located at the bottom of Stormvale Castle. It is where we can find Godwin's Prince of Death face, which looks very much alike to Ganishka's tree face after he underwent a second apostle transformation. Is it potentially a foreshadowing for a second transformation Godwin will undergo in Shadow of the Earth 3 DLC? Don't know. I'm way more confident in the next reference than speculating on this. A reoccurring in-game location reference are the sword monuments spread all across the lands between with bits and pieces of lore. This pays homage towards the Sword Hill from Berserk, serving as a symbolic graveyard for the deceased members of the first band of the Hawk. Which is probably also the case for Elden Ring, since these monuments are prominently found at places where huge battles took place. To wrap things up with the locations, the last not so much reference but inspiration is Qliphau's atmosphere of dread, decay and abominations. It probably served as inspirational material for designing Caelid, since neither we nor Guts' party wished to stay for too long in either place, and traversing both places is its own hellish level of survival as well as nightmare fuel. As for the design of common enemies in Elden Ring, there are only two other references I could find having some form of resemblance to entities in Berserk. For starters, Elden Ring's trolls bear some semblance to the Jötnar in form of their long beards and size, though I concede that this is one of the most far-fetched Berserk references in this video since it really is a stretch. Contrary to this, however, are the Beastmen of Helm Azula, which designs were definitely inspired by the trolls. Both possess the third appearance of a wild animal with a similar head design, with the Beastmen's design leaning more into a wolven appearance, however, for a more cohesive lore, as well as portraying them as a more sophisticated ways to better contrast their degenerate visual inspiration. And for the very last Berserk reference, I'm going to talk about the Outer Gods for a moment. Although they are more inspired from their Lovecraftian predecessors in Bloodborne, they serve a similar function in Elden Ring's lore like the God Hand in Berserk, since both serious deities manipulate and shape the world however they want to. For example, in Elden Ring the Greater Will drastically shapes the lands between for millennia, similar to how Phantos' effects on Berserk's world ended up transforming the entire world, which started off the Fantasia arc. Another parallel comes in the form of sacrifices. The God Hand demands from a to-be apostle to give up that which he or she holds dearest to obtain great power. A similar situation plays out in Elden Ring between the Fire Giant and his fell god. The giant offers up his mutilated leg to borrow the fell god's power in his fight against us. And another case of sacrifice could also be made for the Greater Will's demand for a living vessel to house the Elden Ring, resulting in surrender of autonomy over the body to house the Elden Beast in exchange for wielding the Elden Ring's power and being the Golden Order's leader. I don't plan to go deeper in this comparison since it's just an interesting similarity I noticed between both series deities that holds enough credit for me to be included in this reference video. And with that, those were all of the Berserk references I could find in Elden Ring, resulting in a total of more or less 36 references. Please let me and others know in the comments if I have missed any other reference. Also consider to subscribe since I'm very close to be eligible for some form of monetization, which will allow me to dedicate more time towards YouTube and make this possibly my full-time job. I wish you a good day and see you in the next video. Ciao.